And no former or current Labor politician would appear on the program and defend their time in government. I spoke to Coalition Gaming Minister Michael O'Brien a short time ago. Minister, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thanks, Josie.
There's some pretty astonishing bungles in this report. The one that jumped out to me was that the auction actually was stopped before bidding had been completed. Did you feel a bit angry when you read it?
Well, I'm angry. I think all Victorians deserve to be angry. They've lost $3 billion plus of their worth, their wealth, that can never be recovered because of the Labor Party's financial incompetence. How silly, how foolish do you have to be to stop an auction while bids are still being placed? You wouldn't do it if you were selling your house, but the Labor Party did that with Victoria's lucrative pokey assets.
The Auditor-General did put most of the blame onto public servants. He found that the Department of Justice was basically incompetent in its management and setting up of this system. But everybody who was behind that, in fact, still works at the Department of Justice, which is now your department, including Penny Armitage. Why isn't anyone being held accountable?
Well, Josie, I think the Auditor-General has found that there was a subcommittee of Cabinet that made the high-level decisions about this process, and that's where the mistakes were made. Who was on that subcommittee of Cabinet? Daniel Andrews, the current leader of the Labor Party. Rob Hulls, the current deputy leader. John Lenders, the current leader of the Labor Party in the upper house. They made the decisions. They made the high-level policy decisions. You can't blame the bureaucrats for implementing bad decisions that an incompetent Labor government made them do. So the accountability should rest with the Labor Party, not with the bureaucrats.
Let's go to the Department of Justice, though, which is your department. Do you have faith in everybody in there working in those roles, the same people that were involved in this report that the Auditor-General was so critical of?
Well, I think that, yes, I do have confidence in them because they are implementing the orders of the government of the day.
So you don't agree with his findings that some of them didn't do their job properly?
Well, I think that certainly this Auditor-General's report is a damning indictment of what Labor set up, of Labor's $3 billion cost to the community. Are there lessons to be learned from it? Yes, there are. The main lesson that I think Victorians should learn is you cannot trust Labor to manage money, because time and time again, whether it's this auction debacle, whether it's desalination, whether it's Mikey, Labor have proven themselves to be completely incompetent when it comes to managing public money.
Let's go to the key decision to set up a pre-auction sale. This was designed to help the small clubs, but it didn't. In fact, it spectacularly backfired. The former Gaming Minister, Tony Robinson, says he held a secret meeting with the now Deputy Premier Peter Ryan, and organised that deal behind your back when you were Shadow Gaming Minister. Were you aware of that meeting?
That's an absolute nonsense claim, Josie. This is just Labor smokescreen trying to avoid responsibility for their $3 billion mess. They've got $3 billion worth of economic blood on their hands, and they're desperately trying to point the finger at anybody but themselves. Now, the meetings that took place is things that I was well aware of. And can I say what the Auditor-General's report shows on page 7 of this report is that those clubs that bought their entitlements before the auction paid 3 times more than the big clubs who bought their entitlements at auction. So if it hadn't have been for that pre-auction process, the taxpayer would have been dudded by a further $250 million.
The money is now gone, but you're in government, you can make changes. One way you could recoup some of the losses is to increase the tax rate on individual pokie machines. Will you do that?
Look, this particular asset has now been sold. Those 27,500 10-year licences have been sold, and we can't do anything about that.
But you can increase the tax rate?
Well, in relation to the tax rates, what I'd say is that out of the process, while most hotels and most clubs picked up these pokey entitlements for an absolute bargain, a number had paid a very significant amount of money for them. If we were to simply raise tax rates because of Labor's mismanagement and Labor's spectacular failure to deliver taxpayers' value for money, you might actually see some clubs and pubs going out of business, not through their own fault.
Have you met with James Packer since becoming Gaming Minister?
I've met with Mr Packer, I've met with the Interchurch Gambling Task Force, I've met with the Hotels Association, and I've met with Clubs Victoria. I've met with a lot of groups who are interested in the government's gambling policy, and I say the same thing to each of them. We announced our policy before the election, and we're going to deliver it.
On James Packer in particular, what sort of meeting did you have with him?
I had a meeting to discuss the government's gaming policies, including our commitment to having pre-commitment on every gaming machine in Victoria. And I've said the same thing to Mr Packer as I've said to Dr Mark Zernzak from the Interchurch Gambling Task Force. We are committed to implementing this policy.
On your energy portfolio, you must be pleased to hear that the federal government is considering buying out the Hazelwood power plant. It certainly takes the problem out of your hands.
Well, in relation to Hazelwood, what we've always said is that the former Labor government's pledge to close it was unfunded, and there was no plan to replace Hazelwood with baseload power. Hazelwood produces about 25% of this state's energy needs. You can't afford to switch it off unless you've got replacement baseload ready to go. So while we're interested in what the federal government has been discussing, they haven't been discussing it with us, and we need to be confident that there'll be replacement power ready to come online if Hazelwood does close to ensure we can keep the lights on.
Minister, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Josie.